Thank you all for joining us for our full disclosure episode in partnership with Mercer, a Marsh business. Today we have a very timely topic looking at structuring your pharmacy benefits RFP and survival of the strategic, so we can help you make this process more thorough, prepared, and help you make these big decisions around picking your vendor partner. We are super excited to have Debbie Doolittle join us today. She's the senior principal at Mercer, which is a Marsh business, and excited to hear more of her expertise around how to best take your company through the RFP process. Debbie, if you'll give an introduction.
Thanks, Alyssa. I'm so happy to be here. As some background, I've been around the pharmaceutical industry and pharmacy benefits almost my entire life. I am a user from childhood, not the president of a company by any stretch of the imagination, for those of you who may remember that tagline from other commercials. And I've worked as a benefits analyst for a employer. I was a business analyst for a pharma company. And I have also been in pharmacy benefit consulting for close to 20 years. While I'm not a clinician, I often joke with my family, friends, and clients that I do eat, breathe, and sleep drugs throughout the day. So by all means, I am happy to be here and really looking forward to talking about pharmacy benefits, specifically the RFP, because I find that it's the foundation of finding a new partner and sometimes reaffirming you're with the right partner today.
Thank you, Debbie. We're so glad you bring all your experience and expertise here because it can be quite the process to go through. And so we will break it down for you all. First, we'll go through building your RFP committee, who should be at the table, followed by a timeline and implementation planning so that you're well prepared to see the information provided and make the best decision for your company. And then we'll go through evaluating modern PBM models, since there are a lot of differences at this point, and that can be challenging during an RFP. So it's important to know what the different types of PBMs can bring to that. And then finally, we'll do a Q&A along with your questions. So please put any questions you have in the chat so that we can answer them at the end. Let's start out by talking about who should be involved in the RFP process and building the RFP committee. Debbie, how should organizations define success criteria before even launching the RFP, and who should own that process?
Good questions, Alyssa. I would say that identifying up front what success looks like for the organization is critical, and keeping in mind how you're going to measure that. So making sure that you have specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound requirements. That sounds like goals that you would set for your annual review, but it's also important when doing an RFP. You want to look at the total cost of care, what quality and clinical outcomes you're looking for from your PBM partner, the member experience, making sure that you have network adequacy so that your members are able to fill their claims, administrative efficiency, and that you're also taking into account risk management. And that could be data privacy and everything else related to fiduciary responsibilities as well. You also want to ensure that you've got those fiduciary and regulatory requirements that are becoming more and more prevalent as we're hearing about class action lawsuits, or that we are seeing more and more states and the federal government starting to manage or assist in managing the PBM market space. So keeping that in mind as you are looking to develop your RFP. As far as who should own the process, I find that that's typically the benefits team, whether it's strictly benefits or comp and benefits, and then bringing in other organizations within the company, whether that be finance, because you want to be able to budget the benefit. Procurement typically has a seat at the table only because they like to manage the process or make sure that you're following appropriate internal procurement guidelines. and that you're also meeting any vendor data requirements that your organization may have as a whole. That also brings us over to thinking about incorporating IT on the back end, or in the background, I should say, because they may have questionnaires that they need the vendors to complete to ensure that data is held very strictly and confidentially and securely. You'll also want to think about legal and compliance. What requirements do you need to incorporate from them into your RFP? I rarely see them at the table in the RFP process itself, but their documents and requirements are always a crucial part of any RFP process. And then some clients actually have a medical component, whether that be a nurse or a medical director that is part of their overall corporate initiatives. Or it may just be somebody within HR that is tasked with wellness, making sure that they're incorporated so that you're able to look at that broader clinical effectiveness of a vendor.
Thanks, Debbie. Now that we've talked about who should be involved, could you give us an idea of what you recommend for the data the committee can look at before the RFP kicks off so that there's internal understanding of what metrics they want to look at?
I always recommend getting claims history. That will not only inform how you're able to analyze financially what a vendor will do, maybe potentially clinically what a vendor can do, but it also is data that they need once it's been obviously identified and scrubbed of all PHI. But it helps them determine how they're going to underwrite you as a plan sponsor. Looking at your drug utilization and drug mix, are there clinical programs that they would recommend and become part of their overall underwriting to help control that spend? Or it may just be as simple as trying to identify which pharmacies your members are utilizing and ensuring that they're in the network and are going to have the appropriate pricing around them. I'd also say a member census. It enables a PBM to understand where your members are geographically, as well as learning, obviously, the typical socioeconomic status of members. If they can identify where they are in the US, it helps them understand what the disease burden is in that general area so that it also informs underwriting. We also have the benefit design details, and I'm talking details. So what type of formulary you have today, what type of formulary you're going to want in the future, open, closed, with exclusions, without exclusions, what your cost share arrangements are, what clinical programs you have in place today, because that will inform part of your utilization that you have, that you're sharing with them, but also what you're looking for as far as the level of management going forward. And then I would also say something as simple as your network structure. Some clients do have a limited or narrow retail network and may want to keep it that way. I know that there's a lot of legislation out there that's looking to broaden those networks. So having that be available and your intent regarding those available to the underwriters is great. While you don't want to share it with your bidders, you also are going to want your current contract, because you will want to know how you're going to compare what you have today with what each of the bidders are bringing, whether it be service level agreements, performance guarantees, if it's financials, if there are specific terms and conditions that you previously negotiated into that contract that were hard wins. You want to make sure that you know you need to get that into your RFP process itself. And then also any data and security requirements, like I mentioned previously, those as well as any legal requirements need to be told up front and then later incorporated into the RFP itself.
That is quite the list of things to collect to be appropriately prepared for the RFP process. In terms of working with their incumbent PBM, what reporting should employers request from the incumbent PBM so that they can enable a fair comparison between the different PBMs, or especially if it's a legacy modern model being considered?
I would say most of what I just outlined can actually come from the incumbent PBM. So you just send them, or your consultant can send them a data request and get most of it, but ensuring that you do have that claims level data. Obviously, if they don't strip it of PHI, you'll have to strip it of PHI. But the utilization metrics, the formulary types, the plan designs, all of that can be summarized by your current PBM and then shared with the bidders. You'll also want for later in the process, and you won't need it right now, but when you go through the implementation process, you'll need things like claims history files that are more recent than what was used in the RFP. Open refill files if you're going to transition mail order and specialty claims, and open PA files if you're going to transfer your prior authorizations from your incumbent PBM to your new PBM. But that's for later in the process. So not anything you need to hold up the RFP for if you don't absolutely have it right now.
In terms of timing, obviously, this is quite the process, and we want to make sure that folks can be prepared. What does an ideal RFP timeline look like from initiation to go live? What would you recommend as best practices?
Off the cuff, I always recommend my clients start with a minimum of 10 months. And that's when you look backwards, I always like to start with the end goal in mind. And for me, the end goal is not the go live date of 1/1, but it's actually open enrollment. So ensuring that if a client actually wants to have open enrollment support available from the new PBM to answer questions like, is my drug covered? How is it covered for prior authorization, step therapy, cost share, that sort of thing. All of that needs the system already built. So I actually start in the middle of the screen where we're talking about and then work on either side of that because it's going to take 6 weeks, for most PBMs to code the benefit and test it so that it's live and ready for the customer service reps to actually do test claims at open enrollment. So know when your open enrollment timeline is, back into that 6 weeks. And then I would say another minimum of 2 weeks, but typically more like 4, to actually code everything down, capture everything really for those benefit coders to be able to code it. And there's a lot to go into that process that we can get into. But overall, from that point, then you can back up into your RFP as far as when your start time is. Most RFPs can take anywhere from 4 months to honestly 12 months, depending upon a client's internal timeline and processes of how they select vendors and then the internal approvals that go with that. So the entire process from beginning to end is typically 10 to 12 months, but can take as long as 18 months.
Debbie, how often do you see organizations start too late? Like, is this broadly known that this much time should be incorporated into the process? And anything you recommend if they don't have quite this much time?
So, a couple of options. I have seen clients try to start too late. Um, a common pattern is that we see them start, say, late May, early June for a 1/1 go live. And so it can be done if you're looking for basically best pricing and or you're willing to cut corners on certain things to move, but you're not going to have all of that open enrollment support. It's more of let's find a vendor, let's get the benefits coded and go live. And there's trade-offs is what I'm saying. Yes, it can be done. Is it advisable? No, there are risks inherent in that.
Yeah, and when you mention the risks and having it ready for go live, but not really having that open enrollment support, what are some of the things you see that are the toughest for the HR leaders to manage when they don't have enough time, and especially when there's not support during open enrollment?
Those clients are typically getting questions of, again, is my drug covered? And all they can provide a copy, typically in PDF format, of what drugs are being covered, but to their members. but it doesn't give all the detail that a member really wants. So there are a lot of questions that may not be able to be answered. And it's just a matter of if a client is in a paternalistic organization or not. I have found clients that are all about lowest cost. And so they will just push everything through to get to that lowest cost. But if they are looking again towards that more paternalistic, keeping members informed of things, they really do need that time frame. So the other option is to do the marketing now, but do it for the following year, potentially, and renewing for 1 year with their current incumbent if the relationship is tenable enough to withstand that 1 year extension.
Those are some important considerations and good options if the timeline is short to see, like, what the trade-offs really, need to be. In moving towards evaluating the PBMs, especially modern PBM models, what are the most significant shifts you've seen in the PBM landscape over the last few years? And what should employers be preparing for over the next 5, especially if maybe they haven't gone out to bid in a while, they've had some renewals with their same incumbent PBM. What's different today that they may have not seen in the past?
Good questions. So let's talk about what we've seen over the last few years, because we do have clients who haven't been out to bid in 10 plus years. And so that landscape looks very different today than it did back then. We're seeing a big focus on data, whether it's pricing data, just claims data, who owns it. That is an inherent responsibility. We're seeing a lot of focus on clients needing to understand their fiduciary responsibility. So ensuring that they understand that and incorporating that into the RFP process. That may take some education um, that a consultant like Mercer could do, or if they're involved in national trade organizations, that education may come in that realm. I would say there's also the growth of specialty pharmacy management. I remember when I got into the business eons ago, specialty was just becoming a thing. And so, yes, you wanted somebody there to help control that spend, but it wasn't 25, 50, 60% of the overall costs that it is now today. So that's becoming an increasing focus and understanding what you can do to manage that. We're also seeing PBMs change in that more and more clients are looking in the market for a vendor who is not just one of the more traditional big three that you think about. And so we're seeing a lot of focus on moving away from something like spread pricing and moving towards greater pricing transparency, which does have a lot of different meanings for a lot of different people, but pass-through pricing, acquisition pricing, that sort of thing. Are they looking more for getting their members the drugs that they absolutely need rather than just ensuring that PAs get approved and that there supposedly is a way to manage the spend? Or are they looking more clinically in ensuring that maybe approval rates aren't 80 and 90% and that they actually need to be closer to 60% in order to ensure that you're not just meeting a rebate guarantee, that you're actually actively managing that spend? And so as that comes together, you're starting to see a lot of clients focus in on per member per month or per employee per year type of guarantees, even trend guarantees, and looking at maybe even trend guarantees within a specific area, whether that be, I dare I say it, GLP-1s, but the autoimmune conditions are always a big driver of costs historically. So looking at both of those. And then some of that, what should they be prepared for? To your other question, what should they look towards for the next 5 years? I can't underline this enough, is the regulatory and fiduciary focuses that are abounding left and right. So making sure you have a good partner that is going to assist you in meeting all of those requirements, whether it be data reporting or assisting you with meeting your own fiduciary obligations, since you are assuming that you are self-insured, because you do own the fiduciary responsibility there. There is going to be that continued emphasis on price transparency, which is a good thing. Wanting to understand where your pricing is, what's driving it, how decisions are made in relationship to that pricing is also an avenue of transparency. And then again, looking more and more towards that increased clinical outcomes that we've been discussing about, and ensuring that as the ecosystem of the PBM world, the pharmacy benefit world, expands, ensuring that your selected partner is able to integrate or interoperate with some of your point solutions that you may be using, whether it be a wellness vendor or somebody who's going to help you find the lowest cost drug. There are a lot of vendors that do that very well already, a lot of the PBMs, but some vendors may want, or some clients may want to be able to manage that or have the employees take more ownership of that and have ways to facilitate that. The direct to consumer and direct to employer landscape is evolving rapidly right now. And so incorporating that, being able to incorporate that into both your RFP, but also into your vendor relationship is the PBM relationship is going to be very important.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. And I'm going to do one quick plug. We had our April full disclosure episode looking at the PBM reform and regulation updates. That includes a lot of what Debbie just mentioned regarding fiduciary responsibility. So please check that out for a whole separate dedicated topic. And in terms of how to measure the PBM for organizations ready to look beyond the big three, you had mentioned the PMPM or per employee per year. What's your recommendation for how RFPs should be structured to enable a true apples to apples comparison?
Defining everything. Um, I'm a big fan of always iterating. I think some people are tired of hearing me say it, but the devils are in the details when it comes to pharmacy and pharmacy spend. So making sure that you have everything clearly defined in your RFP so there's not a lot of ambiguity. And therefore, there's less ambiguity for the PBMs when they're underwriting and your interpretation thereof of that information when it comes back. I would also ensure that you're getting identical service level agreements from them, pricing transparency, not only for how they're making their decisions, but what they're going to share with you. And understand, even if you have to spell it out for the PBMs, how you're actually going to measure them. So if you specifically want a per member per month guarantee, define what that means to you, what's going to be included, and what you're willing, if any, to take any exclusions. But if they are excluding things from that guarantee, you need to read over that with a fine-tooth comb, because if you have a high turnover, some vendors out there will look at the turnover rate and say, well, we're going to exclude something that hadn't been in the utilization before. If you have high turnover, there's a possibility you're going to get something in that pool later down the road and not have any guarantees around it. So making sure all of that is very clear.
Yeah, I feel like the guarantees are a topic we could have a whole other
Yes.
webinar on. In terms of the procurement process, especially where there's the legacy and now the modern PBMs, how has the procurement process itself evolved, especially for those still with the big three who are curious about what else is out there? Are you seeing more capabilities assessments and informal evaluations before a formal RFP launch?
Yes, we actually are. It goes back to a lot of clients haven't been in a procurement situation for 10 years and they don't understand what's available in the marketplace today, not only from capabilities, but the philosophy of a lot of the PBMs are different than the big three. And so understanding how that translates into how they're going to approach member services, how they're going to approach their pricing, and how they're going to approach the service levels, servicing your account in general is going to be key. So those pre-capability meetings are important. Think of them, if you think about it, a reverse RFP to some degree. You're interviewing a bunch of different vendors first and then narrowing it down for the bid. And then from there, you may narrow it down further for a finalist meeting. But yes, pre-capabilities. I've also seen on select occasions where jumbo employers may decide to do a pilot. They like the idea of a certain type of PBM or a PBM coming to the market and maybe be a winner, but they're not really quite ready to shift away from those big three. So they may put a pilot in for a year or two to ensure that that's going to work for their population. And then have an agreement that if certain metrics are met, that they're going to be willing to move either more population or the entire population over.
Yeah, that is a very interesting concept too for those employers that have different plans and have the ability to do that to be able to understand it. I heard you say service quite a number of times. So clearly that seems to be a very important emphasis. Of course, we can talk about pricing all day long and the differences between discount-based spread pricing versus cost-based acquisition, but you really want to make sure you have a partner who prioritizes service along with all the pricing. This brings up us to the Q&A. Thank you for those of you who have put questions in the chat, and if you haven't already, feel free to add them now. If we can start out with another prep question, Debbie, it's how do you counsel clients who face internal resistance to switching from an incumbent PBM?
Basically, I would start with grounding it in the fiduciary responsibility because the client does have fiduciary responsibility. So it's necessary to go out to market or find some way to measure whether or not the current vendor is the appropriate vendor or if there's a one that will better fit, whether it's service, it's transparency, or better aligned so that you are able to meet your fiduciary responsibilities. I would engage your stakeholders, whether that be senior leaders, and typically is early on. And then a lot of people they understand the PBM they have today. So when you tell them that they're going to have to switch, there can be a lot of noise from your employees. And so making sure that you're educating them and communicating with them early so they understand why you're doing it, why this vendor was selected, often helps minimize that noise.
Debbie, you've given us a lot of top tips for how benefit leaders can be successful during the RFP process. This one is the inverse of that. What's the most common mistake you see employers make during the PBM evaluation?
The short answer is focusing specifically on cost. And you need to balance that with the overall total cost of ownership, rebates, what it takes to actually switch from one vendor to the next, the formulary disruption, the network disruption, the long-term administrative efficiencies. So while a 1-year savings may look great with one vendor, needing to look at that over a longer term, say it's 3 years, or just understanding what it's going to take to switch and whether or not that makes sense.
This next question is an important one because it takes into account what size of employer and so it's at what employer count does it make sense to run a formal RFP versus leveraging a consultant's existing benchmarks?
I would say we typically see clients at that 2,000 employee mark are the ones that most often go out to bid. And we have seen them lower, and we do quite a few of those year over year. But at that level, using internal benchmarks is also appropriate when they're looking to potentially carve in, because we know kind of what the carved in arrangements look like in the marketplace in general, but also even on carved out arrangements. But again, making sure that the consultants' benchmarks meet a lot of the broader criteria and it's not just a financial play. are they going to meet the necessary requirements for fiduciary responsibility and accountability? That sort of thing.
You just mentioned accountability. That's one of the next questions is what are your recommendations for the main points or metrics to hold the PBM accountable?
It comes down to guarantees. What is the PBM willing to put into the contract to ensure that they are able to meet financial guarantees, service level guarantees, anything that will hold them accountable? Because if they start pulling away from you during negotiations because they're not willing to meet some of those requirements that you think are critical to ensuring that your fiduciary responsibility is met, whether that be audits, which I highly recommend. That's a whole other topic that we could dive into. But ensuring that you have line of sight into everything and how you're going to be able to hold that PBM accountable is always necessary.
And we'll finish up with this one. For those listening to the call that are looking to switch in 2027, that's this next question. I'm looking to execute a quick RFP for January of 2027. Where should I start?
Where or when? Because when, I would say start immediately, since we are basically in the middle of the second quarter, and you're going to need to balance, again, what I mentioned previously about balancing what you need and what risks you're willing to take on if all of those needs are not met. So you may not be able to do the full communication out to your members and help them with that transition during open enrollment. You may just need to do the RFP and do the implementation and move on. So again, it's a balancing act of what your priorities are. And if necessary, potentially do the RFP now and build in, pardon me, the potential for a year extension with your current PBM if absolutely necessary.
Trying to make it more like a game time decision.
Right.
Do your best to switch on the timeline you'd like, but then make sure you're evaluating the service.
Yes.
This has been great. Thank you, Debbie. You've given so many great tips and insights. We do want to give everybody your information and mine. Please connect with us on LinkedIn to continue to get additional um, insights and connections. And we want to thank you all for joining our full disclosure webinar. We have a lot of content from SmithRx for pharmacy benefits in general and those around PBM reform and the proposal process and everything else. So please check this out, and we look forward to having you join our future full disclosure webinars.